Hello, I am Dr. Karen Simone from the Northern New England Poison Center, here to talk with you about marijuana and urinalysis. I will be covering marijuana, THC medical, non-medical, and I will mention CBD because that is relevant to looking at screens for marijuana. My objectives today will be to make sure you understand the relationship between marijuana, THC, and CBD, to be able to differentiate between a screen and a confirmation, to be sure that you understand secondhand smoke and whether that would affect your analysis. And then I'm going to talk about the possibility of CBD showing up on a marijuana urine screen as what I would consider to be kind of a false positive. If you learn nothing else today, take home these points. If you care about whether it's accurate, always get a confirmation. And this is especially if there is anything legal or involving a person's job or whether they go back to prison or jail, a confirmation is very important. And we'll talk later about what I mean by that. The second thing you should remember is that if somebody claims their positive is from secondhand smoke, that's a bunch of hooey. So you can kind of say right away, that's not reasonable and they're probably not telling me the truth. And then if in doubt, ask an expert. This is very complicated. Everything is still in development, especially with the CBD, the cannabidiol. So you need to check with somebody who knows and stays on top of this to make sure if you are making interventions based on this information, they are the correct ones. I think everybody knows what marijuana looks like, but if not, here you go. It has over 500 components in it. More than 100 are cannabinoids, which are things like the delta-9 THC, which is the active ingredient that gets you high when you use marijuana, whether you smoke it or ingest it. That's what everybody's looking for. The CBD is something else that's in there. It's used medicinally in very large doses, larger than what you typically buy on your own without a prescription, for very specific seizure disorders in children. And we do believe that a marijuana plant that naturally has CBD in it, the CBD in the plant actually helps control for some of the adverse effects related to the marijuana. This slide is just to show you that the cannabis plant, which is in the middle, Cannabis sativa is the most common one, is responsible for all kinds of extracts where they pull out THC and CBD and make products related to that. And then also you can synthesize things that look like it chemically in a lab. And they're all kind of cannabis or cannabis related. Cannabis can be in the form of marijuana or hemp. The difference is how much THC, which is the component that gets you high and is abusable, they have. Hemp can only have very little, 0.3% or less, not enough to get a person high. So if you want to smoke your hemp t-shirt, you go right ahead and do that. It'll be fine. Why are we here? Marijuana urinalysis. There are screens and there are confirmations. A screen is what most people do initially. Is usually immunoassay, which basically means we use antibodies to figure out whether THC is present. We're looking for a metabolite of THC, which is what THC turns into once it hits your body and what we can measure in your urine. What's good about a screen is that it's very fast. You get the results quickly. What's bad about it is it's not exact. It can measure THC and some of the other 100 plus components that are in the marijuana plant that people are using. So there's a little bit of cross reactivity. You could get false positives. You can interfere with it with all kinds of substances, which can cause false negatives. A point of care testing, which is what a lot of the doctor's offices will do to get immediate results in a cup or other ways at a doctor's office, is a screen. A confirmation is a different method. You generally have to send out to a much larger laboratory with experts to get this. GCMS or LCMS-MS are examples of what a confirmation would be. In a lab result, usually instead of getting positive or negative, you actually get a number, 560 nanograms per ml or something like that reported out. In an ideal world, you would get a screen, and if it's positive, you would then take that same urine and get a confirmation to make sure that the screen positive is true. So this is a gold standard. If you're deciding on whether someone goes to prison, jail, loses their kids, or loses their job, or has other interventions that are important, you should always have a confirmation. That way you can be sure. It does take longer, probably 3 to 5 days to get this back. So how long is marijuana positive if you're using it? If you never use it and you just happen to use it within the weekend before somebody tests you, probably you'll be positive for days in your urine. If you use it every day in large amounts, I smoke a bong 5 or 10 times a day, you're probably going to be positive for weeks and maybe a month or longer, depending on how long, how low we measure, which gets us to the 20 or 50 nanograms per ml. 20 nanograms per ml is a lower cutoff. Most people use 50 nanograms per ml because the 50 nanograms per ml, if we exceed that, that gives us a pretty strong positive that we can be confident of. And what I'm going to show you here is the reason why. The dotted line is the 20 nanograms per ml. The solid arrow in red is the 50. And as you can see, once you are dropping down to 50, it mostly is on the downswing if you stop using. Once you hit 20, you can be positive some days and negative others, even if you stopped using. Here's another example, same thing. And here's another example, same thing. The important thing here is that if you use a 20 nanogram per ml cutoff, you might pick up on people who really did stop, who will be positive one day, negative the next, and then positive, and that doesn't really help you manage them. So most people use that 50 nanograms per ml so that we know if you're popping up and down above it, you're probably using again. And if you have questions, that's when you call an expert and ask, hey, does this make sense? I don't understand what I'm seeing in my patient. What can go wrong with urinalysis? People can cheat. That's why we check the temperature to make sure it's their urine, and the specific gravity and creatinine, which help us with, did they pour water in their urine if you weren't watching them when they did the test, hoping that the urine would fall below the cutoff and not measure high enough to be positive, because we only report it as positive if it falls above the cutoff. Or they could add bleach or vinegar that's under their nails and pee on their hand, and maybe that will change the pH enough to make the test not show positive. The other thing is they can buy all kinds of chemicals to put in their urine, some of which actually work to interfere with the screens and cause the test to come up negative, even when they actually are using marijuana. You can buy the urinator. These are very old, but it just gives you an example. Essentially, you use someone else's urine that's clean, or you buy reconstituted urine and you put it in here, and that's what you submit, and it will be clean, hopefully. The other thing is you can buy all kinds of products which help you, again, provide urine that's clean, and they have instructions on heating it to the right temperature and all of those kinds of things. Secondhand smoke, it is just ridiculous. There have been all kinds of studies, and you'll read things occasionally that indicate that people can be positive from secondhand smoke. One of the reasons we use the higher 50 nanogram per ml to say we only indicate it's positive if it falls above that is because that pretty much rules out secondhand smoke. And just to give you an idea, they have done studies. They pack a bunch of smokers in a car or a van or a box and then put non-smokers in there and measure their urine. And quite frankly, to have a high enough level to test over 50, you really have to get high, and there's so much eye irritation that they have to put goggles on the participants. So, it's really kind of ridiculous to say you're positive is due to secondhand smoke, but make sure you pay attention to the cutoff and ask an expert if you have a question. Then lastly, let's talk about CBD. If you use CBD and you're not smoking pot, can you be positive for THC? Part of the problem is we don't know how much CBD is in your CBD, and we don't always know how much THC is in your CBD. And the label, according to some studies, is not always very accurate. There's not a lot of testing that confirms that what you buy is what you're actually getting. And the other problem is the screens can interact with non-THC substances, and it can be just enough to push you up over the 50 nanogram per ml cutoff sometimes. It's pretty unlikely. CBD doesn't cross really well, but it does cross with some screens. And, oftentimes there's some THC in your CBD, plus they're measuring other things besides just THC, and maybe that bumps you up a little bit over the 50 nanograms per ml. But the good news is if you take that to confirmation, we can tell whether it's THC or not. And we even have a couple labs that are doing ratios of how much CBD and how much THC. So if they're using CBD and THC, I think we can probably catch them. So back to the key messages. You should remember, get a confirmation. Secondhand smoke positives, probably not for real. Ask an expert if you have doubt, and information is still developing, especially with relation to cannabidiol or CBD. So please ask if you have questions and check with that expert.